So my name is Becky Downing and I'm the CEO and founder of Buzz, or formerly known as Buzz. Ran that for 8 years. Sadly, that went out of business last year, which I will tell you about during this podcast. I like to refer to myself as a recovering lawyer. I used to work in law, practice for about 8 years. And then when I hit the big 3-0 in age, I thought now or never, and jumped into starting my own business back in 2013.
Perfect. So tell us a bit about Buzz. Where did you see the need for this service, and what exactly did you do?
So the idea behind Buzz Move initially was I'd had a very negative moving experience as a customer. And I'm sure sort of experience that lots of people can relate to. The removals business is typically quite unregulated and opaque. It's easy enough to put up a flashy looking website or to fake some reviews, but ultimately, and also because people don't move that regularly, it's not like they're expecting to have repeat custom anyway. So what happened was I found this, what seemed like a reasonably priced man and van company on Gumtree. And literally anything that could go wrong went wrong. So they turned up late in a ramshackle van. They dropped my TV. They didn't have insurance to cover that. And then at the end of it, they say, oh, it's, X pounds per hour, but then they get stuck in London traffic and the bill ends up being much higher than you expect it to be. So I just thought, that's nuts and there's got to be another way of doing that. And at the time, there was no real website or comparison platform to kind of regulate that. So I launched BuzzMove, which at the time was Europe's first price comparison and booking platform for home moves. And a big part of that was, okay, I need to bring some sort of transparency to the pricing here. Because I'd also heard of other experiences where people who are a bit further along, who are a bit wealthier, would have someone like walk around their house and clearly take note of the fact that they could afford a bit more. And there was just no sort of transparency around that. And a big challenge there was then, well, how do I price online automatically? And I spent a good 9 months working with industry experts trying to work out an algorithm for that. And a lot of time and money on building the UX behind an inventory tool, which essentially enabled customers to tell us what they were moving. Because of course, what you're moving is a central data point here. It determines the size of the van, how many people you need for the job, how long is it going to take, etc. So I launched that, got the initial funding for it, raised about $1.5 million over a couple of tranches from angel investors, took part of an accelerator as well. But what I learned really quickly was, it didn't matter how sophisticated my algorithm was, garbage in, garbage out, right? So most people just don't, it didn't matter how beautiful the UX was for the inventory tool, like most people just don't have the time to go around their house and work out exactly what it is that they're going to move. So an offshoot from that was we built a software called Buzz Survey. And so what that was most larger established removal companies, for centuries, they've been sending these surveyors around properties with a clipboard and a form, and they literally manually undertake an inventory of everything you're about to move. Highly inefficient, but the removals industry swears by it. They think that that's the way that they're going to convert jobs. They build a relationship with their customers, etc. And so what Buzz Survey did was it replaced that typical in-home survey with a video survey, and it was completely built around the removals industry. And so that was kind of like a SaaS platform. It was a B2B play, and they paid the annual cost for that. And in terms of how successful that was, we had about 200 relocation companies in 17 different countries using that. In terms of BuzzMove, eventually, this is one of the main learnings I had in terms of market readiness. It was very slow to take off because, the removals industry is quite reticent when it came to technology, but towards the end, we had about 33,000 people moving on the site per year. So that was kind of the moving side of things. And at this point, so I'm operating 2 businesses. And again, central to all of that was I was collecting this really novel data set, which was what people have in their homes, which sounds quite big brothery. And actually, if you think about it, when else would you actually kind of disclose that about yourself. Like, when else would you let a total stranger in your home to have a look at what you have, than when it's complete sort of necessity of, I need to take inventory because I'm about to move, or insure what I have. And that's what propelled the insurtech side of things, because, you know, for years I had these insurance companies circling us going, you know, that data that you've got is quite valuable, and we've been trying to collect it for some time. And, you know, because of the big brother aspect that I just mentioned, there was some difficulty around that. And so I launched Buzzfault, which is, you know, essentially the user journey was very similar to Buzz Survey, which is you downloaded the app as a customer, you do a quick sort of 15-minute video survey of your home. Then you'd log back into your inventory app, and within 3 hours, you'd have quite a detailed inventory of everything that you own, together with a valuation. And that's important because you know, lots of research has been done on this. You know, we all typically underestimate what we own to the tune of about 40%. And this is the thing, because, you know, that comes back to bite you essentially at claim stage. And I have another personal story where that actually happened. I got burgled. I thought, you know, I have home insurance, you know, everything will be okay. And then from the moment you pick up the phone, it's like you're treated a little bit like a criminal, because now you have to prove everything that you've lost. And it's just one of these crazy situations where it's like, who is sort of prudent enough to keep a detailed list of everything you have, receipts, etc. And the answer is really nobody, unless you're in the insurance industry yourself. And so obviously put 2 and 2 together in terms of, you know, it seems rather pointless having someone take a massive inventory of everything you have, only for that data to be thrown away because they no longer need it. Let's put it all together, and hence the Buzzfault offering. And so originally wanted to work with other insurance companies. Long story short, they weren't really ready to use the data that we were collecting. And so I ended up partnering with Munich Re, digital partners, and we actually built a completely unique insurance policy from scratch that used that data to provide, you know, no one size fits all, unique prices and policies for all of our customers. And there was a kind of on-demand element there, in that, you know, you could add and deduct items. So say you bought a laptop on Amazon, whatever, you could just add that and the price would automatically change. So I mentioned earlier this concept of market readiness. So the moving side of things was, you know, very slow to kind of grow, because certainly pre-pandemic, and this is where the irony sort of lies as well in terms of timing, the industry just saw technology as an evil thing, and they just liked sort of doing things the way they were used to doing it. Buzzvault was a totally different experience, and this is this beautiful situation where, you know, as a startup, of course, you have all of these metric boards hanging up everywhere, and, you know, they just sort of lit up like Christmas trees, and we were starting to sell policies to the tune of 100% month-over-month growth, which is obviously really exciting. And it was basically the market saying to us, you know, we want this, and we're ready for it. And of course, other fintechs like Monzo and whatnot have paved the way for us in terms of, you know, people now kind of expecting this digital experience. Mm-hmm. So that was brilliant and, you know, extremely exciting. You know, sort of 6 months before this impending doom that was the pandemic, of course, we're looking at it going, okay, so we're running 3 businesses under one roof, which, as you can imagine, the overheads were pretty insane for that. But, you know, it's okay because, you know, we're growing, and also the moving side of the business, although it's a bit slower, obviously when people are moving home, they're thinking about buying home insurance. So, you know, over time, this will be like a natural customer acquisition route, like readily built in. It all became one big ecosystem, or at least that was the idea. And so we were really investing in growing, and I'm sure we've spoken to a lot of founders about this topic as well. You know, you can only really at any one point in time focus on either growth or profitability, because growth entails you're really investing in marketing, you're really kind of going for the market grab, whereas profitability entails optimization, you know, really reducing costs, etc., which, you know, typically kind of comes later on in a business journey. And so we were really focused on growth. couldn't forecast that a pandemic was around the corner, had a funding round lined up for sort of March, April of 2020, which was when we all went into lockdown. And unfortunately, my investors got cold feet. And that fell through. So, you know, obviously the first response is, okay, we need to cut costs to survive, or, you know, put employees on furlough where possible. And there was, you know, the moving side of the business, we rendered them dormant and just thought, okay, let's just focus on the insurance side of things, because that's really taking off. But we were obviously a regulated business as well, because we were operating as a managing general agent. It was our own insurance policy. And so with that comes capital reserve requirements. And so we needed to have about $1 million in the bank sitting around as cash at any one point in time, which for a startup is quite a lot of money to just have lying around. And, you know, as soon as we hit that threshold, we were essentially in breach of our underwriting agreement. And I just had a difficult decision to make at that point, which was, you know, I could have kept burning cash to the ground, you know, cutting costs left, right, and center, and to really try and ride through the pandemic. But there was obviously so much uncertainty around how long that was going to take, you know, when would the economy recover. And I also felt a responsibility towards my employees to make sure that they got proper severance packages before I sent them into this kind of apocalyptic world that was the pandemic. So I chose to close up shop, which obviously, as you can imagine, hurt and, you know, was heartbreaking, given it was 8 years of work. It depends on what your frame is, really. You know, initially it kind of feels like that is slightly down the drain, but, you know, with time and reflection, you realize actually the kind of experiences and the learnings that you get from that, you know, it was absolutely worth. I would absolutely do it all again. You know, there aren't many successful first-time entrepreneurs either, so, you know, I certainly am extremely lucky to have had that experience, and I will of course take all of those experiences and learnings with me and do it again and again and again, because I love it. So that's the story of Buzz.
Perfect. A lot to dive into here, and obviously thank you for sharing this story as well. I think we see a lot of founders hiding away when things don't go right, and we're all guilty of oversharing our successes. So I think this is massively important. So just to take a step back then, so you were in a position where you had a successful business with the original idea in the moving space. And I suppose, like so many other founders, you then saw there are a number of different avenues. You ended up launching 2 others that have very, I suppose, different skill sets. So when you're looking at insurance and when you're looking at surveying compared to actually moving, completely different skill sets, and also completely different demographics of who you're going to be dealing with on that side of things. So I suppose my question for you is, for other founders that are thinking of opening up these other avenues in whatever industry they're in, what were the challenges around that, around effectively running 2, maybe 3 businesses at the same time?
I mean, if I had my time again, I would have kept it a lot simpler. I mean, it all made sense on paper, because it wasn't like, you know, I was running a beauty business and a removals business, and, you know, they all kind of, the idea was that it was all a kind of self-perpetuating ecosystem, and they all kind of work together. But, you know, my advice to any new founder would be to try and keep that as simple as possible, and to, you know, find a repeatable, scalable model, of course, you know, in the old lean startup lingo, for one model, and to really focus on that first. In terms of your point about expertise, I find this an interesting one, especially, you know, as I'm interviewing now. You know, a lot of, obviously, when organizations are recruiting for execs, they're looking for industry, domain knowledge and expertise, and that makes total sense. But actually, personally, I don't think that is, you know, if you're a smart person, you can usually pick up on what's important anyway. And actually, it helps you be the most important thing really is to enlist the help of experts, and you do that either through hiring the right people or getting experts on the board or advisors, etc. And yeah, I certainly wouldn't. So for instance, with the removals business, you know, as I said, I spent 9 months before I launched the product with industry experts learning about the very sexy industry. Actually, I say that like, you know, it sounds sarcastic, but actually, you know, really built a kind of respect for the industry, because people in the industry are actually quite passionate about what they do, and particularly because it's so easy to set up a, you know, a man and van operation. You need a man and a van, but, you know, it kind of does a slight injustice to the more professional removal companies, that there are actually a lot goes into the professionality of that, and a lot of training goes into that, and a lot of time goes into you know, providing a much higher level of service. So I actually find it extremely interesting to, yeah, and that was the bit that I actually enjoyed about law as well. I mean, I was a construction lawyer, and so I did worked on disputes to do with things like oil pipelines and whatnot, which sounds incredibly boring, but actually when you delve into the detail of it, there's some really interesting stuff there. So so take a real, you know, I don't think a passion in the industry or the subject matter is at all a prerequisite, but yeah, you have to take the time to really get to know and get to grips with industry, really listen to the people who are in it, listen to the customers, listen to the suppliers, and no one person can do everything. You know, that's you know, one of the things I always admit about myself is, you know, as a CEO, you can't, you have to orchestrate everything, and you're the one with the vision, and you're the one with the North Star, and you're the one who brings it all together, but you're not, you don't have the skill set and everything, you can't. And so that's where it's extremely important to hire the right people with the right expertise to kind of bring all of that domain knowledge to the fore to make it all happen. So I guess to summarize, you know, industry experience in industry is definitely nice to have, and will help you, but it can certainly be gained by, you know, really immersing yourself in it and researching the industry. So that's one, and then two is just hiring the right people, which is also an area where I've made plenty of mistakes. Believe me, like I've got my 10,000 hours of interviewing people and reading CVs and trying to hire the right people. And that's probably where, you know, the vast majority of my learnings lie, but you can't do it on your own. And you need a really good team around you to be successful.
Okay, as a quick divergence then, what are your top tips for hiring? What are your bits of advice there?
You know, I got to a point where I would just cast aside the CV because, yeah, I mean, obviously CVs still serve a purpose in that it gives you a good summary of the person, and you can sort of immediately highlight red flags if needed. But to be honest, until you're sat across from that person, and it's not even, you know, it's maybe 20% of what they're saying. I'd say 80% of it is, you know, their body language, their energy, how, you know, and I'll tell you the biggest mistake, whenever there is, and there's no real scientific research behind this, or maybe there is, but I am a big believer in instinct when it comes to people as well. And put it this way, whenever I've ignored my instinct about a person, it's always come back to bite me in the bum. So if you get a little bit sort of glamored by, you know, someone's CV, or, you know, someone could be really confident in an interview and you think, wow, this person has just got their life completely sorted and they're going to make such an unbelievable difference to this business. And there might be a little niggle there, but there's something a little bit off about this person. And so always go with your gut. And I think, you know, obviously experience and skill set is a given and is important. But the people who, you know, have made the biggest impact in my business and who've thrived the most, the ones who've just got the right attitude, you know, and with that, I mean, you know, a willingness to learn. And particularly in a startup, you need people who can just jump in the trenches. You know, there's no such thing as that's not my job. You know, You may be an expert in UX, but if you know, we're running behind on building something and you happen to have front end coding skills, just jump right in there and help out. You know, those are the people that really thrive in startups. I've also had plenty of conversations with people whereby it's just not for everybody, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. So loads of people have a kind of impression of working with startups. It's going to be that it's a lifestyle choice. It's like, I'm going to be playing ping pong all day, or, you know, it's going to be happy clappy all day, every day. And that's just not the reality. It's actually extremely hard working for a startup. It's, you know, you're under a lot of pressure. You know, the exec team's under a lot of pressure because they've raised investment and they've got shareholders, investors that they need to deliver for. And you've got this constant ticking time bomb of the cash that you've got left in the bank that, you know, every month that goes by just keeps like dropping down. So it's quite stressful, and it's not for everybody. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I completely understand that someone would prefer the 9-to-5 security of a job than to have to deal with that. So it's not for everyone. That often comes out in the wash, you know, in the first sort of couple of months. So yeah, it's really about the person. Probation periods, I know it really is, and it's for both of us, right? It's, you know, you really don't know what a person's going to be like until they start working for you. But also for the person in the job, you don't want to be working somewhere where you don't feel like you're thriving, where you don't feel like it's bringing the best out of you. So equally for that person, a probation period is extremely important for them to see, but put the company on probation, put us on probation. So those, I'd say, would be kind of my key learnings, really. It's, yeah, does that make sense? So, you know, if you're hiring, certainly, you know, go with your gut, don't ignore that. And yeah, particularly in the early stages of startups, it really is about mindset, perception, resilience. There's going to be a lot of, one of the key complaints I often had was, you know, the strategy keeps changing, everything keeps changing. And I'm like, yeah, because we've never done this before. We know what the overriding vision is. We know, we have an idea of what we're trying to achieve here. But the whole point is we don't have a clue. And the only way we can navigate through this is to collect a ton of relevant metrics, measure everything we're doing, you know, always go back to the market and the customers for feedback, and adjust and pivot until we get there. And that means that from week to week, from month to month, our strategy will change. Because if it doesn't, then, you know, that's just a fast track to failure, really, because you're not taking on board the feedback from the market. So, but again, it's extremely understandable, because as human beings, we are wired to fundamentally resist change. Like, change equals danger. There's a really primitive part of us that just does not want that. And, you know, you have to really learn to adapt to that if you're working for a startup.
Perfect. So welcome back to part 2. We dived well into your journey as an entrepreneur, the highs and lows of it all. So really just a few points to finish off. And I think that decision to close a business is never an easy one for a founder. The business becomes part of you. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that decision. Because we see a lot of founders that hang on month after month because they're well versed in that story of something comes along last minute to save the day, when we all know that is not the reality for the majority. So talk to me a bit about how you made that final decision.
Well, I mean, it's not an easy decision, is it? Because it's not just about you, it's about a whole load of other people as well. I mean, it's about you to the extent of, you know, sacrifices were made, loads of years of hard work, and it's very difficult to let go of all of that. But you have employees, you know, they bought into it, you're having to make them redundant. And as every month went by without funding in 2020, you know, I had to make a new group of people redundant at the end of every month. And those are never easy conversations, particularly when you're sending them into this new apocalyptic world of the pandemic. So, and then of course you have investors who invest a lot of money into your business. And, you know, the institutional investors, the VCs, they take a portfolio approach. They know that 9 out of 10 of their startups are going to fail. One will essentially give them the ROI that they need, and they take a much more objective philosophical view of it. And so you feel less like you're disappointing them. But some of the earlier stage angel investors, you don't get VC funding until you get to a certain point. And so, you know, most startups will have taken on either friends and family and cash that they invest in. And so those are very difficult people to disappoint, especially when they've been with you for quite a long time in the journey. So how do you make that decision? It's not easy, but you have to take a big step back and look at it objectively. And for me, you know, obviously you take steps to try and save the business, and that mostly comes down to cost cutting, you know, cutting parts of the business out, you know, what's working, what's not working, you know, really cutting the fat, like what overheads are really needed, what aren't. You know, there comes to a point when you start cutting too deeply, then you really start impacting on the growth of the business. And that's where you end up with this kind of catch-22 situation of you start impacting the growth of the business, the metrics start looking bad, and that makes it even harder to raise money. So you're kind of stuck in that situation. For us, you know, my hand was forced slightly by the fact that, you know, we were a regulated business, FCA regulated business. We and therefore had other kind of requirements to comply with. And you know, under our binding authority agreement with our underwriter, we were required to have certain cash reserves. And as soon as we dipped under, you know, under that amount, and it's quite a large amount for a startup, you know, to just have that cash hanging around in the bank at all times. You know, we had to raise our hands at that point and have that conversation with the underwriter. And then the conversations around, well, okay, you know, so you've not raised money yet, but what's the likelihood that you're going to raise it, you know, within the next 3-6 months or whatever it is. And, you know, we're in the middle of, well, not even in the middle, we were at the beginning of a pandemic. You know, we'd just gone into lockdown, and, you know, there was no real sort of clear view or opinion as to how long it was going to take. You know, and it could have been 3 months, could have been 6 months. Look, in hindsight, you know, we're into this a year later. And investor appetite just completely changed, understandably. You know, the risk appetite completely changed, and it became extremely difficult to raise money. So even though actually a lot of the metrics in the business were going absolutely in the right direction, the goalpost completely changed. So had it been a year prior, we would have raised the money. I still believe that 100%. You know, that the business was a guaranteed success. Nobody can say that. I wouldn't say that. You know, there are, you know, still plenty of reasons why it might have failed, but I do believe that we would have raised the money at that time had it not been for the pandemic. And then you look at your cash flow and, you know, the people that you're still employing, and, you know, as I said at the beginning, you have responsibility towards them as well. And you know, you can either just keep going and burn cash to the ground and keep trying to raise money, or, you know, what I decided to do was to, you know, make sure that everybody was, that they, because the job market as well, as we know, has not been particularly great during this pandemic either. So I decided to do that. And yeah, at some point you just have to make the call. And it's extremely difficult, but for all the reasons I said before, it's not just about you. It's, you know, there's, you know, lots of other stakeholders and people to consider. And at some point you just got to call it a day. And that's what I did.
And you're clearly very conscious about everyone's well-being that's involved in the business, and we've touched on particularly the staff a number of times. But talk to me a bit about handling the relationships with the angel investors, with the suppliers, partners, whoever it may be, that once that decision was made, how do you make sure you don't burn bridges?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's incredibly important. Again, you're bound by the legal structure that sits, you know, the insolvency law as well. I mean, we didn't want to become technically insolvent, because what that means is you go into administration and administrator takes over and you no longer have any control as to how that company gets wound down. And, you know, I mentioned making sure that employees got proper severance. I also wanted to make sure that all of our creditors and suppliers got properly paid off. Obviously, if we file for bankruptcy, then, you know, someone comes in, as I said, and just prioritizes all of the debts, and people get paid off and creditors get paid off. But, you know, a lot of creditors end up losing out, unfortunately. And I didn't want that situation either, because, you know, we had a lot of partnerships with other startups and I didn't feel that they deserved not being paid. So, so yeah, once that decision was made, you know, the decision was always, we will not let this company go technically insolvent, and we'll just systematically pay off our debts where possible. Obviously, negotiating deals where possible. We were in a pandemic, and so, you know, we weren't using our office space, for instance. And so we managed to negotiate really decent deals there. But on the flip side, where we didn't manage to negotiate a very good deal was on all of our assets. So, you know, as you can imagine, quite a lot of companies went out of business during the pandemic. And so there are companies that, you know, come in and they buy like all of your furniture and all of your laptops and assets and stuff. And you're never going to get, you know, an amazing price for it, but, you know, they were being inundated with requests. And so literally, you know, we might have got quotes from 5 different companies, 4 of which said, you know, we'll come and pick it all up for free. And I'm like, well, hang on, you know, there's like 50 laptops there, they're worth something. There's one company that said, you know, we'll give you a couple of grand for it. And it was absolutely heartbreaking, obviously, because you're like, well, you know, this stuff is worth so much more than that, but that's just the reality. It was just the reality of the situation. We just had to deal with it. And so, so yeah, of course, I was mindful of the fact that I didn't want to burn bridges for myself, and, you know, I will continue building ventures and businesses, and, you know, I didn't want to tarnish my own reputation, but also, you know, the reputation of your investors is incredibly important. And that was a deal that I made with them right from the beginning, which is, you know, whatever happens, if we end up in the unfortunate situation of having to wind down the business, like, don't let it be a messy situation, do it properly, which I completely concurred with. You know, it's their name is attached to all of this as well, so you've got to do the right thing by them as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, but I can totally understand, you know, why founders just fight to the bitter end, because, you know, it's their personality. One, I mean, you've got to be quite, you know, resilient / a little bit deluded to be doing it in the first place, and 2, it's a really big thing to give up. So, you know, lots of people sacrifice their jobs, might have been working without a salary for a while, you know, and so it's completely understandable that, you know, they'd want to keep going, but you've got to balance that with everything else that I just mentioned.
And obviously throughout this, so mental health is a huge topic, and really something that founders generally have to watch throughout what is inherently quite a lonely journey, high pressure journey, and so on. And no more so at times like this. So for other founders that are going through a similar thing, what advice would you give for looking after yourself? I know obviously you're very conscious of everyone else, but as the founder, how do you look after yourself in this scenario?
Like if I were to mentor someone else through this, I would advise them not to do what, you know, I ignored a lot of that, certainly in the early years, to my own detriment, I think. But yeah, you do, it is, I think you kind of, like, as you're going through it, you just kind of get your head down and get on with it and knuckle down, and a lot of the repercussions kind of come later on. But it's to find a support network, obviously, you know, and founder networks, for instance, are very important. If you can try and because, you know, a lot of the people that you're dealing with in the business have interest, you know, there's a conflict of interest there, obviously. And so it's kind of tempting sometimes to build closer bonds with people that you work with, or, you know, a manager, for instance, that you happen to get on with really well, and to try and confide in them, etc. And I've done that a lot in the past, but ultimately, you know, don't forget that they work for you, and that can get quite tricky, and can be conflict of interest there. And so it's much better to find someone who can be objective, where there's no conflict of interest outside of the business, who's been through what you've been through. And it is really hard to understand, you know, what that's like, being in that position, unless you've been through it yourself. So if I had my time again, I probably would have identified or reached out to a network of other CEOs, startup CEOs, or people who've done it before, other entrepreneurs, and talked things through with them. You know, I very open about the fact that I go to therapy, and I have done for many years, and that has been extremely helpful for me. You need that kind of again, completely objective third party, where you can just talk about it and then leave it in the room, and it doesn't have to impact the rest of your life in any way. So don't, and it is really easy just to kind of keep going and ignore that side of things, but it always catches up with you in the end. That's the problem. You can't really escape it. And so it is much better just to acknowledge it, that it's important to be dealing with stuff, and don't escape it, and kind of process it in a healthy way along the way, and find that support. You know, it's particularly tricky, I suppose, in a pandemic, because you're in lockdown, and and it's more difficult. But you know, there again, everything is remote these days, and there are remote groups. And you know, I've more recently reached out to some more, you know, remote groups to talk about things, and that helps too.
It's really about dealing with it head on, then, as an individual. By the sounds of it.
Yeah, don't do what I did basically for years, which is ignore it, like stick your head in the sand, and you just go to work, and you just keep going, keep working at it. And then in the evenings, quite often what you find yourself doing is networking, you know, potentially drinking, maybe a little bit too much. You're just obsessed with what you're doing, right? And a lot of the people that bought into the startup are equally obsessed with it. And so you end up going out, and just, you know, you just never switch off, because all you ever talk about is the business and making the business successful. You need that separation. You need to be able to switch off from all of that, to keep going in the long run, and to see it more as a marathon rather than a sprint.
Yeah, some really good advice there. So from the whole experience then, from launching the business, running it through both the highs and the lows, what are some of the real key learnings that you'll take on to whatever your next venture is?
That's a very good question. Key learnings. Well, obviously what we just talked about, which is the mental health aspect. Don't ignore it. I don't think I would do that again. The kind of the detachment side of things. So not to allow your identity to be too attached to, you know, and your self-worth to what you're building. So if you can kind of, so I've referred to this before as like a loving detachment situation, whereby, you know, you're obviously really passionate and motivated about what you do, and you know, there's no getting around it, you know, hard work, you know, and that's all kind of inevitable one way or another, which is fine if you love what you do, but you know, try and remain detached enough to know when to let go of something, or to cut your losses. And that may not be on the startup altogether, but just, you know, in terms of pivoting, for instance, or, you know, adjustments to the value proposition, or adjustments to, you know, various aspects of the business model. So having that kind of loving detachment, not ignoring your mental health. I would also say, I've, you know, many learnings that we spoke about in part one about hiring people. You know, I have, you know, much better idea of the sorts of people that would thrive in a startup now. You know, being able to deal with that uncertainty, you know, having the right attitude, and to trust your instinct as well. I genuinely believe we all kind of have this weird, not quite psychic, but kind of like, you know, whenever I've ignored my intuition on people, I've always been proved, you know, that's always worked against me. So I probably have more confidence now to know to trust my instinct when it comes to hiring people. always put the customer at the center of everything. I know it's really fashionable to say that, but it's really, really easy to forget that. And to get a bit lazy when it comes to just don't rush it, you know, keep things as lean as possible at the beginning, you know, and don't get overexcited, and make sure that you really have properly validated everything with actual real potential customers before you start plowing money into marketing, etc., and trying to grow the business. Always keep the customer central to everything that you do. I'd say those are really my key piece of advice, really. Just always remain curious at the end of the day. If you can be curious about you know, what makes your employees tick and not make assumptions, you're going to end up with a much happier culture. If you can remain curious about what a customer actually wants and actually listen to them, you know, you never know what you might unearth in terms of you know, demand for something that you never even thought would be appealing to anybody. If you can kind of see it that way, see it as a gigantic experiment and remain curious about stuff, I think that is really the best way to go when it comes to building businesses. So.
And we touched on it just before jumping on this call, but what can people expect to see from you going forward?
Well, as I said, so I don't know that I can quite say where I'm going to yet, but I can say that I will be building businesses and ventures on behalf of a corporate. It will still be in financial services. So yeah, I very much look forward to building, you know, new innovative products that, you know, customers actually want. I will be working with lots of really interesting, passionate people. It will still be quite similar in that, you know, I'll be heading up businesses, and we'll still need to pitch for funding, etc., and make it all, you know, work. But you know, it's I will still very much be in that world, and I will be starting next week. So very excited about that new chapter.
Perfect. And for those listening, where can they learn more about yourself or get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, I would say. So if you just Google Becky Downing LinkedIn, I'm reasonably easy to find. I'm going to be doing more podcasts like this, and we'll be putting out some more content on my thoughts and ramblings about startups and all things fintech. So if that's of any interest at all, then please do follow me. And I'm very happy to chat to anybody and give advice, and love meeting new interesting people. So please do reach out.